Welcome today. We're going to talk about Rousseau mezzanines, a subject that I know many of you have been waiting for quite some time. Your trainer today is myself, Randy Pearden, one of the sales team members up here at Rousseau. For today's subject, we've divided it up into three buckets. There's mezzanine types, the quoting requirements for a mezzanine, and then the site visit. First up is mezzanine types. Now, you may or may not know, but within the industry, there's three foundational types of mezzanines that exist. There's those that are a part of a building or attached to structure. These are generally done at the time of building or facility construction. Then there's structural beam and post using a combination of structural post beam and joist, as you can see on the right. And then last, there's shelving supported, which is the most common one you see from Rousseau. The choice of each of these is determined by flexibility, cost, and local building codes, with shelving supported typically being the most cost effective. Now from Rousseau, there's many types of mezzanines and high-rise as well. These include shelving supported, deck over, stack and store, and the newly available cabinet mezz, which we're going to show you in just a second. Starting off with the first type from Rousseau, and not commonly thought of as a mezzanine, but the same engineering principles apply, are high-rise shelving systems. Now for Rousseau, what high-rise means is anything above 123 inches. High-rise systems require engineering, and due to their height, they also require some type of certification from us, proper engineering. And these are the systems you see like in the picture here, where you've got loads and loads of shelving going up very, very tall. Now, these are not available to every Rousseau distributor. Again, you must have mezzanine certification, which we'll come to in a second. Next, and this is more what you'd commonly see, shelving supported catwalk mezzanines, which is one of the most common types. These are constructed, as you can see, of shelving on opposite sides of an aisle, while a deck of some type, often constructed of bar grade, creates walkways in between the structures. Engineering, that is attention to building codes, the stamps, fire suppression, and etc., are critical elements of consideration when building these systems. Now, it's worth noting on this one, this is usually the most cost-effective for storage mezzanine that exists, because the shelving system would have had to have been purchased regardless, and the floor is added onto it. Next up is deck-over style mezzanines. Now with deck-over mezzanines, they're basically identical as you saw in the previous picture, except on the bottom, flooring is created for additional space, usually a large open area. This is usually done by adding something like tongue and groove plywood on usually a roofing material of some kind, obviously called Q-deck. That being said, it can change per region. As with catwalks, engineering, fire codes, lighting is critical, as well as understanding the capacity of the upper system. For example, it's worth noting to any customer, just because it's flat doesn't mean you can put a 10,000-pound pallet up there. It'll crush the rest of the system, as the top does have a rating. Next, and the only one that does not require mezzanine certification, is the stack and store. The stack and store is constructed, as you can see in the image, simply by stacking cabinets on top of each other for three sides of access. This system is very unique as it provides an incredibly large amount of small parts in really an isolated and contained area, and can be easily uninstalled, installed, and moved. Additionally, this system doesn't usually need permits either, or lighting, or sprinklers. Now these systems, if you haven't seen them before, are more often than not in things like the aeronautics industries, where thousands of small parts are needed in a relatively small area. Last but not least, and not yet as well known, is the cabinet mezzanine. You may not be aware that we can do this. The R cabinets can be used to construct a mezzanine on their own. Note though, these are not standard RA30 housings. These mezzanines are built, as you can see, by stacking multiple special housings on top of each other, and then adding floor supports and flooring similar to the catwalk style mezzanine. So why this versus that would be the benefits of being able to move it later, and the benefits of having drawers on both levels, which may or may not be possible with the other system. Now, it's worth considering cabinet mezzanines are relatively uncommon as they're fairly new. So consult your engineer locally early to confirm if this is something they can provide certification for. Now with mezzanines in Rousseau, if you're not aware, not everything is included. Except for the stack and store, all of our mezzanines require things like structural posts, stairs, decking, railings, tip gates, or other components that are not supplied by Rousseau. Rousseau also does not provide the local engineering stamp or verification within your geography, so this must be sourced as well. Now, especially for my American friends on the call, if you don't have a source for these items and need one, please feel free to reach out to your Rousseau rep. Chances are they know where to direct you. Next up is quoting requirements. Now, quoting mezzanines can be complex. They're usually involving quite a few different products, as you can think of from our last slide, and these are used in concert to create a total solution. Additionally, fire suppression guidelines, building codes, engineering requirements, and seismic considerations vary significantly in each region. For this reason, Rousseau requires all dealers to be authorized to sell a mezzanine system, excluding that stack and store. And that brings us to step one, which is that mezzanine certification. How that becomes done is we send a set of forms that we need filled out and returned to us for evaluation of your capabilities and your experience providing a multi-level system. Once these forms are filled out for your company then becomes mezzanine certified if it passes. If it's determined, however, that your company is not qualified, you would then have to work with another qualified distributor. Now, why this is step one is mezzanine certification absolutely must be in place before any quotation can be started. This is an insurance requirement. So that means that has to happen regardless of the urgency of project or client. Step two, and what you'd expect, is the layout. The next step towards the quotation is creating that layout either by hand or in drawing software as your company's capabilities determine. These drawings are usually quite similar to standard shelving layouts, as you can see in the high quality one on the left. This gives Rousseau the information we need to quote the various supporting components and do the bracing recommendation needed to assist that local engineer. These layouts, although there will be more detail in a minute, should include the location of stairs and any structural supports, as Rousseau components may be required to connect to some of these points. Next is the quote itself. After receiving the layout, the Rousseau project management team will create a bill of materials, a layout drawing of any floor support components required, and a paper bracing recommendation that's for your engineering. These items will be sent as a package with detailed indication of which support brackets go where and an explanation of our recommended bracing guidelines. It's important to remember everything quoted from Rousseau is a recommendation only, and the final say will always be with the local engineer. Step 4, revisions. There are very commonly revisions. As with any construction project, these are to both quotations and drawings. Now, these revisions must be done correctly because there's a lot of engineering, as we've spoken about, around this. So it's critical to keep all the information in a single email per revision to minimize the chance of errors and additional engineering issues and costs. This is also the time where, say, your engineer wants an adapted product of some time for compliance, maybe a welded footplate or something larger. This is where Rousseau will work on these adaptations and quote them to you as per your engineering requirement. Now, a note on existing systems. The customer already has shelving, and everybody knows that Rousseau can build multi-level systems. Unfortunately, though, if they already have shelving, bracing recommendations and mezzanine quotations cannot be supplied for these systems. The reality is that although Rousseau systems can support a multi-level system, an installed system has unknown stress, uses, damages, etc., which make it not possible for Rousseau to supply any information whatsoever to transform that existing system to a multi-level system. So what that means for everybody is if you think the system may change later, get that recommendation before it's first installed. Now, there's a few things to consider before that quote request is sent, and they're required really to do that layout drawing effectively. including stair locations, install location, engineering, fire codes, lighting, permits, concrete, and then a comment on weight and loading. First is the stairs. Stairs and other access points, such as doors or lift tailgates, must be on that first set of drawings because they affect quite a few different things. Regulations can change wildly, one region to the next on these as well, but they're often founded on the basic logic of access to exit and are usually tied in to fire regulations. If you're unfamiliar with your local regulations, please call your building inspector and get more information from them. Next is where it's going. When the mezzanine is being quoted, we have to provide that bracing recommendation, which is tied to geography. This bracing recommendation will consider the seismic zone and may have different requirements in terms of the componentry and etc. This means site location matters. Because of that, we will not quote any mezzanine or provide a bracing recommendation unless there's a location of the site installation indicated. Then there is the engineering. Local engineering is required for all mezzanine installs and is up to the distributor or the end user to source and provide. Our comment, of course, is that Rousseau systems are engineered, as you may expect, but they're engineered to be designed for performance of the components, and they do not carry a local engineering staff that would be required for local construction. Next is fire suppression and codes, considering early. This is the most common concern for mezzanine installation and design. There's codes around sprinkler systems, things like access to exits, maximum size of shelves, and quite a few other things. It's important when selling mezzanines that you're knowledgeable in the local fire suppression requirement to effectively design the layout that comes to Rousseau. Now, it is worth noting from our perspective, we will not take responsibility if a design does not meet local fire requirements because we don't know those requirements. Then there's lighting and electrical, which is integral, as you can imagine, in multiple floors. Throughout the mezzanine, there's usually outlets and lights, both as well, that are often added sometime during installation. These additions are important to consider as the current location and future location for the lighting outlets could significantly increase the cost to the end user substantially. Now, it's unlikely that the distributor will arrange electrical as part of mezzanine construction, but it is important to bring up early a comment that we're going to repeat shortly. Next is permit requirements. In most municipalities, some type of a construction permit is required for mezzanine construction. These permits often require explanations of things like fire suppression and require a layout, design details, engineer drawing or stamps, electrical layouts, and possibly more. Early in the process, ask the customer if they're going to be getting the permit or if they expect you to so you can charge appropriately, and determine quickly which steps your company will be involved in during that process. The next thing to look for early is the concrete itself. The floor really, really matters. Often overlooked, the concrete thickness itself can change whether a project can happen at all. Sometimes during the construction phase, and depending on the building design, concrete sometimes just isn't thick enough to support the engineering load. And quite often it's not found out until a permit becomes rejected. Consider the floor early and ask questions about how thick the concrete is and if they've got details about that for your local engineer. Last in the quoting requirements is weight and load, and this is commentary to caution you. Seismic is the single largest dictator of how much a shelving supported system of any kind will support based on its configuration from the engineer. Local engineering may derate a system significantly, so exercise very clear caution when speaking about the load capacity of a system early on with your customer. Assess their needs, but don't make promises. Mezzanines in a high seismic zone often become derated to very low values, such as something of 100 pounds a shelf, or maybe not even accepted at all. So speaking with the local engineer early, understanding and assessing the customer need is crucial to not overpromising. Last but not least, some commentary on the site visit itself. Now, when entering a site visit for a potential mezzanine, there's quite a few elements past just accurate measurements and good sketches that are important to look for. Most of these are very little things, but if they go unnoticed, can really impact the installation and design of the project, and in a worst case, stop it completely. The first is uneven floors. Now, I check the floor most simply with a golf ball or something like that to see how far the floor is off. But the problem is, if the floor is greatly off, it may require shimming past the acceptable limit, which is determined, of course, by the engineer and by system design. If the floor is uneven, there's approaches to handle this if it's quite bad, such as floating more concrete, changing post lengths, or others as your engineer agrees. But this has to be recognized early, because if it's done later, it can stop the project completely. The next is drains. Now, drain may be seen easily by checking the floor level, so they can both be done at the same time. But it's not always that the level does go down to the drain. Sometimes construction was not perfect. Regardless of the reason for the drain, though, it presents a leveling issue, but it also presents an anchoring issue. You cannot sit a post on top of a drain. So if the drain was not noted and a post ends up located on top of it, it becomes quite the problem. Next, overhead obstructions can be critical to having frames in the right place, so look up. Often there are height obstructions such as heaters, ducting, sprinklers, uneven ceilings, trusses, and more, all of which can be a problem. It's important to locate these obstructions on your drawing so that when you're doing the layout design, attention can be paid to not build something that can't go there. Then there's the existing lights and sprinklers, a return to what we said earlier. It's a great conversation early with the customer, but if you're putting in a brand new system and it can be designed somehow to accommodate the lighting or sprinkler layout as the customer wishes, the overall cost of the project can be greatly reduced. This can put you in a better competitive situation depending on your relationship. Early on, ask the customer, are they planning on changing all of these infrastructure pieces? Or do they want the aisles to match what it is today? Next, doors and windows. So past the mezzanine itself, other access points may matter for more than just the mezzanine, but for fire suppression, other bay locations, or even the facility's operation. Locate these on your site visit or your hand sketch to assist in the design so these things are not forgotten until it's too late. And now ceiling heights. Ceiling heights are more than just obstructions, and sometimes, as you can see in the image, there's multiple of them. Besides just locating specific items, measure the overall ceiling height and the lowest point of the ceiling in the case of trusses or other items. Without this information, layout design may create something that doesn't meet a local requirement. Certain areas, or certain municipalities, should I say, have restrictions about how much clear space needs to be. As well, a good thing to consider early is take the inventory, existing and expansion. A good layout design considers the existing inventory and the growth of that inventory. When on the first site visit, try to get an idea of how much exists today and how much there might be in the future. Mezzanines are different than a traditional shelving system. Depending on the engineering, you may not be able to just add drawers, so consider the layout early on. On Rousseau, there is, in XLS format as well, a site survey tool that's great for this. Now, our last comment today is know your codes. Each municipality has their own building inspectors and interpretation of building code. It's important to know the codes that impact your ability to design and sell a mezzanine system. And it's equally important to have a good relationship with the local inspector. A good relationship with local inspection, tied together with a good set of drawings and reputable engineers, will lead to a problem and surprise-free installation, leaving you with a happy customer.